Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming out. Look, it's a real pleasure to be here with Shahidul and to have a chance to ask him about this extraordinary body of work and this extraordinary career. We won't be able to cover all the ground, but I have some questions.
There's an exam afterwards.
Yes, exactly. I will be testing everybody. I think we should begin with your early work that's on view here that came about during the period of the military government in the 1980s, and I'd like to ask, what was it about that experience that formed you as a photojournalist that made you decide that you were going to be not a neutral or a dispassionate or, heaven forbid, an objective observer, but we're going to be engaged and we're going to use your camera for the ends of social justice?
It was the other way around, because I'd made a decision to become a photographer based on my need for social justice. I mean, while I was studying, I got involved with the Socialist Workers' Party. I was involved in issues of gay rights, race rights, the Solidarność movement in Poland. And I saw the power of this medium of photography, and I thought, well, does Bangladesh need yet another research chemist? You know, and I thought with photography, I could perhaps achieve a lot more. I didn't know at that time whether I could make a living as a photographer, so I tried out. While I was in London, I joined a studio taking pictures of kids, stopping people in the streets, asking them if I could go to... Those were the days you could stop people in the streets and go to their homes and take pictures. And I'd lay a synthetic sheepskin rug, get a happy picture of the kids. And one of the things I've discovered about photography, I do judging and all this sort of thing. There's no finer photograph in the world for a mum than a happy picture of her child. And that's what I did, and it was good. But I knew that what I wanted to do was very different. And there was a pivotal moment in that sense. I was complaining about the type of work I was doing because I wasn't interested in, this was not my idea of photography. And they said, what are you talking about? You're a star photographer. You make more. I was making, in 1983, £350 a week. That's a lot of money in those days. I was taking that home, and everyone was telling me great things about me. You're a great photographer, whatever. And I thought, it's so easy to slip into this comfortable life. You're making good money, everyone says you're great, they're patting you on the back. And soon I start believing I'm a great photographer.
The best taker of baby pictures.
Absolutely, there you are. Yeah. So that's when I decided to make a clean break. And I went home. But the problem was, when I got to Bangladesh, the type of photography I wanted to do was not something I was known for. I didn't have the credentials, I hadn't worked for a newspaper, I didn't have the track record, but I did have the technical skills. So I set up, along with some business people, a small studio, actually quite a big studio, and I took pictures of celebrities and pretty women and packets of soap and all that sort of thing. And then I thought, well, that's not what I came into photography for either. But while that was, so I started freelancing. But while that was going on, I'd left Bangladesh in 1972, a free country. We'd fought for this nation. And I came back to find it under military rule. So it was really a personal quest. I mean, I was, as an activist in the streets of Dhaka, taking pictures. And in fact, one of the people I was working with at that time, Sarah Hussain, the lawyer, continues to be my lawyer every time I land up in jail, which is not too infrequent, sadly. But that began as a personal project then, and sadly continues till today.
So really, it was a sort of accidental. The crossing of these two strands, your activist life and your professional life as a photographer, was not something that you necessarily planned.
It wasn't planned, but I think it was eventually had to meet, because I had decided I would be an activist. Social justice was what I was about. I discovered this powerful tool, and at the end of the day, it was obvious.
I mean, one thing that I think we need, it's hard for the show to kind of encompass, is that all throughout your career you've been involved in founding institutions and building capacity. It's not just been about your own personal work, but it's been about it's curating other photographers, representing them, giving them access to facilities, basically building up a whole culture. I mean, one thing I found out just before we came on is that you set up the first internet network in Bangladesh.
It was before internet, email, FidoNet.
I mean, why would you do that? Why did that seem as an important part of the work
Very
that you were doing?
Actually. See, the setting up the agency had a little history. I mean, I was showing work in Belfast and staying with friends in Newry, close to that, and they had a 5-year-old daughter, Karina. Karina went to mum and dad's room to make room for Uncle Shahidul. I come back from the city one day, I'm emptying my pockets, putting coins on the table, and Karina's standing at the doorway with a quizzical expression. Usually when she sees me, she jumps to my arms and we tell each other stories. But that day, she's standing there. So I go, what's the matter, Karina? She says, you've got money? Yes, I've got money. But you're from Bangladesh. This little girl couldn't make it fit. Here's a Bangladeshi with coins in his pocket. So that got me into thinking, what is this space, cultural, social, political, within which a 5-year-old grows up, where she's incapable of seeing a Bangladeshi anything other than an icon of poverty. It also had to do with this wonderful African expression, which goes something like, until the lions find their storytellers, stories about hunting will always glorify the hunter. So I thought, well, maybe I need to do something so the lions find their storytellers. So that was the agency. We set it up. But then we knew if the agency was going to work, for it to be set up in New York, Paris, or London didn't have a meaning. It had to be where the photographers were, where the lions were. So we set up in Bangladesh. But then, you're far away from the marketplace. So how do you stay engaged? That was when we decided, okay, we will find a technological solution. So we set up Bangladesh's first email network. What we also did was linked up people in South America, people in Africa, people in Asia, began our South-South network and actually began to work together through that.
I mean, you use this phrase, the majority world. I mean, talk to us a little about why these kind of horizontal connections are necessary between countries.
Well, the term that was being used at that time, and it's still used sometimes, is a third world. Now, I don't want to be third of anything. But also, I mean, this idea that here is the first world and we're in the third world is not an idea I'm prepared to accept. And I want to remind the people who call themselves the first world that we happen to be the majority of humankind. And when the G8 countries who represent less than 13% of the world's population make decisions on behalf of a farmer in Bangladesh who had no play who never chose that person to be the representative, I have serious issues. And I want to turn that around. And at the end of the day, I want to remind this minority world that A, we are the majority, and B, that when you talk of democracy and freedom, it's bullshit. You don't actually believe it. And I want to remind them of that. And one of the things which I have been doing through this work as well, I mean, while we are in Bangladesh, and I'm very appreciative of the huge amount of international support that we've received, I'm also very critical of the role that the northern countries have played to a large extent, and they continue to play, because I'm pragmatic. I don't know of pretty much any nation that does not espouse democracy and freedom in its rhetoric and actively suppress it in its practice. And you've got a situation where these countries, while they say all that they do, are perfectly happy working with a pliant dictator in a country like Bangladesh, as long as it's business as usual. As long as we can deliver on the war on terror, on the Rohingya issue and a few other things, a few human rights indiscretions and things we can put up with. And I think it is about time the citizens of these countries began to ask their government to be accountable. Your tax dollars go towards bombing people across the globe. Your tax dollars go into suppressing people like us. Your tax dollars and the surveillance equipment that you sell are the things that keep us repressed.
I mean, there are so many bodies of work in this show that maybe we could have a conversation about migration and about. I mean, Bangladeshis are all over the world. I mean, where I grew up in East London, there's a big Sylheti community, and you have made a point of trying to represent that experience of migration. And that was it's been a very long-term project. Could you say something about how you've been trying to kind of present the migration?
It started really, I was on a cheap Aeroflot flight from Dhaka, and sitting next to me was this young man, Abdul Malik, and I started talking to him. He was going to go to Tripoli, and he was going to earn $118 a month. Now, he knew that $118 a month was not a huge amount of money, but he had dreams. He wanted, through the money he was going to send back home, for his sister to get married, for his brother to perhaps buy a little shop, for his dad to buy a plot of land. Essentially, he wanted out from the world. I mean, he wanted to die differently from the way he was born. That's an aspiration we all have. We try and climb up the social ladder. We wish the best for our children. We call it initiative when our children do it. But when the disenfranchised have the same dreams, suddenly their entitlement is something that we question. And my need really was to firstly remind ourselves that we are human beings, and with the same concerns, with the same dreams, with the same aspirations. And the book that I most recently did, well, not this book that's just come out, but the one before that, it's called The Best Years of My Life. And there's an irony in there, because I was working in France.
This seems like a title with a little twist to
exactly,
it, certainly.
Exactly, you got it. So the Bangladeshi community lived largely between Gare du Nord and Gare de l'Est in Paris. And I got in touch with Dudu Bhai, who ran a little departmental store. At one stage, he says, maybe you should go upstairs. I'd gained enough trust. So I go upstairs and I see these little rooms with the bunk beds where they all sleep and take turns. And there's one guy there who sells roses. And I ask him, what's it like? He says, it's not so bad. When the police aren't chasing me, when it's not raining, it's not too bad. I make some money. But I've given away the best years of my life. Who will give that back to me? Mm. And we forget that this is what these people have sacrificed. The very best years of their life they've given. And my country boasts of the wealth that it's now earning because those migrants out there are starving, doing everything they can to save money to send back home. And we really treat them abysmally.
I mean, I remember going to the Maldives as a journalist and realizing that the people that I was meeting, the workers in the resorts, were not Maldivians. They were either from South India or from Bangladesh, and understanding the strangeness of a life that would wash you up on this tiny little coral atoll. But there's a very moving image in your upstairs of a pair of boots of somebody who's working in
Look at those bare feet. That's what we wear.
Well, exactly. I mean, even the enclosure of those Bangladeshi feet in those unfamiliar boots, and the way they're worn. I mean, the amount of work and walking that somebody has done to make those things. I mean, they become it's like Van Gogh's famous picture of the boots. It has that same quality as a sort of metonym for the person who wears them. What would justice look like for this Bangladeshi migrant population? And visibility is what you can give. What would you like to see happen for them?
I think more than anything else, even more than wealth, is dignity. Mm. I would like them to be treated as human beings, which is not something that we do. I mean, you look at, every time I get on a plane from Bangladesh, half the plane is full of these migrants. And the way I am treated relative to someone else who's a migrant is abysmal. And they are the people who keep my nation going. Mm. And really, that very easy dissection we make. I'm happy to take your money, but then you stay where you are. And I think, and that's not true just for migrants. I think at the end of the day, it's human dignity which it's about.
I mean, a body of work which has a very different tone from the work about migrants or the work, that early political work, is the photographs of the river, the Brahmaputra, which has such a deep sort of spiritual resonance for Bangladeshi people. But I mean, I was, before I came out tonight, I was thinking about the kind of, there is a poetic and kind of lyrical relationship with that you have there and in those photographs. But then that's also something that politics is encroaching on. I mean, I was reading about China's plan to divert a lot of water from the Tibetan plateau up. They want to irrigate Xinjiang, and the idea that the Brahmaputra could be under threat. I mean, that actually there could be unknown consequences for diverting so much water from the river. I mean, what's your feeling about that? Is that something people in Bangladesh are talking about? Are people anxious about that?
Well, I mean, if you look at the history of Bangladesh in 1971, the role that India played is something we are very grateful for. However, if today there was a cricket match between India and Pakistan, in Bangladesh the audience would be divided. It's a staggering thought. How has India lost that goodwill over such a short time? India is the United States of our region, the big brother. Yeah. And I wanted to do that story because I wanted to look at how this interaction between nations works. I mean, in 1972, when Mujib returned, there was this water sharing treaty signed between Mujib and Indira. It's still not been respected. Yeah. And even today, I mean, last month, this young man, Abrar Fahad, he put on a Facebook post about Kashmir, about the inequalities of the treatment between Bangladesh and India, and he got pulverized, beaten to death. That's how real it is. I mean, we are sitting here, there's an exhibition outside, it's a beautiful show, wonderful pictures, but at the end of the day, there are people dying out there. And I don't think we can forget that. That is how real it is.
Mm. And I mean, India is preoccupied with Pakistan, but China looms over the big brother India. I mean, in Bangladesh is caught in between this kind of pincer movement of these great powers. I mean, how does a small country like Bangladesh assert itself?
By having a spine. And I think that simple act is all that is needed. I think if one day one of our leaders had a spine and could stand up and speak straight, that is all that would be needed. I think if you have spineless leaders, this is what you will get. The Bangladeshi people can do it. They're fantastic people. This is a nation with huge potential. Yet we've never really had that leadership. Mm-hmm. Well, sadly, none of us have had that leadership.
Speak to us a little bit about the diversity within Bangladesh. I mean, the one body of work upstairs is about an activist called Kalpana Chakma, who vanished after she was from Chittagong. And you have chosen to represent this missing woman through these blown up details of her personal possessions. These sort of textures, the worn shoes and the fabric and so on. And those are very moving photographs to me, but maybe you could explain to us the context in which she came from and the differences, say, between the hills and Dhaka.
When you consider the birth of Bangladesh, I mean, when in February 1952, the Pakistanis wanted to have Urdu as our state language, we rebelled. People came out in the streets on the 21st of February 1952. They were shot by the police. People gave their lives for the right to speak our language, and that's what made us independent. That's how we gained this independence. Yet, within our own country, we deprive other people the right to speak theirs. The word indigenous is banned in our constitution. You cannot use the word indigenous. It doesn't exist. So, and Kalpana was fighting for her people, the rights of her people. She was picked up by the military on the 12th of June, 1996. I started the story much later, but on the 12th of June, 2013, I began a story. And essentially, the case has still not been closed. It's ongoing. And the reason for keeping it open is bizarre. I mean, the most recent explanation given was because Kalpana was a vital witness in the case and she cannot be found, the case cannot be closed. You know, here's this woman who's been disappeared in 1996. Yeah? But to come back to the story, so what I decided I would do is to interrogate the silent witnesses, the people who might have watched her on that last walk. So I picked up objects, bark of a tree, little things that I might have found along the way, and I subjected them to a forensic analysis. What I believed a proper investigation might have done. But the idea really was to ask these silent witnesses, because the real witnesses were not being heard. Maybe the silent witnesses could tell us what they actually saw. So that was what I did the first year. The next year, I did a body of work where I looked at her personal belongings and trying again to humanize this person, the other, and bring her back to life. But the next year, I started a different treatment, and that has a history going back to the very early work. Because one of the things that had happened in my first body of work was in 1988, there'd been a massive flood, one of the worst in a century. That same year, towards the end of that year, there was a wedding of the daughter of a powerful minister. It was the most opulent wedding we'd ever had. And the who's who of Bangladesh was there. You know, he was a business magnate. He owned the major newspaper. Everyone was there. Not a word was spoken. So I did a show where I juxtaposed the work of these, the pictures of the flood with the wedding.
We can see that in microcosm upstairs, can't we? The hang is such, it has that extraordinary picture of the woman cooking on the tin roof.
Yes, exactly.
And then next to her, there's the laden down with jewelry. There are the women at the wedding.
Subtext to that. What happened immediately afterwards? I mean, my sponsor was Alias Française, who said, no way are we touching this. No gallery was going to show us this work. So we didn't have a gallery, we didn't have a sponsor. We went ahead anyway. But what was very interesting was shortly after that, the work was reviewed in a magazine that was owned by the minister's wife. And I thought, this is strange, you know, something wrong here. And it was a beautiful review about the artistry of my work, the composition, the black and white and all that.
Everything other than
the politics. You've got it, yeah? So, but that's what they do. They appropriate us artists. You can have your little grant, we'll fund you, you can do this, but let's keep the politics on the side. So I decided I would not let them do that. And I would ensure that the politics of my work would be embedded within the work itself. So when we did the third show of Kalpana Chakma, when I visited her home, I realized that there was no furniture. All they had were these straw mats. And it was this idea that a woman who had so little was yet so powerful for her own people that the state had to disappear her. So I decided I would use the straw mats as my canvas, not photographic material or conventional photographic material. Then in interviewing her brother, I discovered that the last discussion she had with her abductor, Major Firdaus, was the fact that the military had burned their villages. So I decided to use fire to produce the images. By then, we'd also started a campaign called No More, which, as the name suggests, are things that society should not tolerate. And one of the things we were talking against was the garment factory accidents. So I took a laser device that the garment industry uses to tear these jeans. You know, you have these kids wearing these torn jeans. They are actually designer tears. You have a designer from somewhere sending off this stuff, and in Bangladesh you have this laser device etching these jeans, and when you wash them, they tear in these random fashions. Yeah? So I took that laser device and then developed a complex algorithm and a lighting setup to be able to burn the straw mats. So the images are actually made of charcoal. It's actually literally been burnt onto that straw mat.
And whose images are they?
They are images of the people who continue to fight for Kalpana. And when we showed the work in Bangladesh, it was also the way it was situated. So it's a dark gallery. You walk in. Initially, you see nothing, but you smell the burnt grass. Mm-hmm. And then the warriors light up the candles one by one. It's performative. And then there's a very powerful poem which is read out and reread by the audience. So it's a question of including the audience in the struggle. So they are not passengers, they're not viewers, they are part of. And
are the kind of people who would see a gallery show in Dhaka, the people who have some sort of decision-making power? I mean, is your mode of address kind of targeted towards people who could maybe help this investigation along?
The first people I did it for were the Paharis themselves. Because it was very important for them to see this work and for them to have this space and for it to be shown in Dhaka. For them, it is very, very dangerous. Military is the taboo. You don't question the military. And an art project that challenges military action is unheard of. But the Paharis came. They were the ones who performed, and it was their space. But yes, you're right. The decision makers came. What we also knew, and by then, of course, my Tibet show has been closed down, the Crossfire show has been closed down, and when we did these shows, we knew that the military was surrounding the gallery. But they'd worked out that it was probably not so sensible trying to close down a Shahidul Alam show. So we knew they'd surrounded it, but we had the show, and people were in tears in that gallery. And people were moved to action. And I think that at the end is what it's about. If my work in some way can goad you into being a transformed human being, in not being a passenger, in being part of that activism, then I've succeeded.
I mean, you have for a very long time walked quite a fine line in your calculated antagonizing of the authorities. Could you speak to us a little about the circumstances of your arrest and then what happened to you, how you passed your time during those 101 days of imprisonment, because you didn't have a camera, and yet I understand that you managed to create during that time?
Well, firstly, I think I should tell you that we have quite a democratic government. I don't think I've given this illusion that there's no democracy. You know, during General Ershad's time, I had a loaded gun pointed at my face. This is one of 8 knife wounds I got during BNP. Awalam Milik puts me in jail. It's fairly democratic. They treat me equally. But within that space, so I mean, on the 29th of July, these 2 young students, Mim and Rajib, were mowed down by a bus. And of course, the students protested. I mean, but it wasn't simply a road accident. There have been many road accidents. I think there were several issues. One, people had their backs against the wall. The corruption, the repression, the nepotism, all the things that went on. It was a tinderbox waiting to be lit. And I think once the students came onto the street, there was all this pent-up anger that came out. But they did something else, which was very interesting. They made the system work. Suddenly, our roads were accident-free. Traffic was moving smoothly. Ambulances could go and VIPs were stopped. Police vehicles were checked for having licenses and things like that. And it really pointed fingers at the government. Here is this huge machinery incapable of making the system work, whereas the young students, without training, without resources, can actually make it function. So that was a problem. It was a problem that the government found difficult to have an answer to. So what they decided to do was turn their armed goons against these students. I'm a photographer, I'm a journalist. I was documenting this. So I'm taking pictures, I'm posting live on Facebook. On the 4th of August, I got beaten up, my equipment got smashed. I continued reporting. On the 5th of August, I gave an interview to Al Jazeera. At 10:30 at night, I was alone in the flat, and I was at that time actually talking to the BBC because I was going to give a feed to them the following day. The doorbell rings. I go, open the door, and these 25, 30 people come in. I live in Bangladesh. I know what the scene is. I know what was likely to happen. The danger for me at that time was the fact that I was alone in that flat. So had I gone quietly, it would have been too late. So I decided to make as much noise, resist as much as I could, and steal as much time, buy time that I could. And I think those 3 minutes that I was able to gain was what saved my life.
So the neighbours could hear the
They
people,
knew what was going on.
Right.
Yeah,
there was
they
a possibility for you not to just vanish into
exactly.
Into the
I mean,
night.
it wasn't a question of 2 hours later my partner coming into the house to find that I'm not there. It would have been too late. So I was blindfolded, I was handcuffed, I was taken away, I was tortured, and I was told that worse was going to happen. My family was going to, be the next target. And the following morning, they offered a deal. Alt Control Delete. You go home, we forget everything, nothing on the records, we're friends, you stay quiet. That's what's on offer. Interestingly, we had actually been talking about this earlier because people do get disappeared. I mean, there's a wall in our flat where there are pictures of friends who've disappeared, have been crossfired, and sadly, every few days there's another picture that goes up on that wall. So I know what happens. Now, in this situation, we wanted to know how, when some of these people do get released, they stay quiet. I didn't realize I was going to be the guinea pig, but, I sort of found out that's how it works.
How do you say no to that offer? I mean, it's a terrifying situation.
It is terrifying, but I think, again, I'll turn it around. I mean, I think a lot of attention was on me, but in fact, I am part of a much bigger collective, which includes my family, which includes my students, which includes my colleagues, and all the activists around. And I knew that I was not making a decision for myself. I was making a decision for us collectively. And for me to sell out would be selling out that entire community.
Hollow out that network.
And what I also knew was that had the tables been turned, had my partner been there in my place, she would have done the same. And that she would not have wanted me to sell out because of her. That's a relationship we have, that's a commitment we have, and that's a risk we needed to take, because at the end of the day, while fear is contagious, so is courage. And I think you need to stand up.
So you politely turned them down, and they imprisoned you, and how did you pass your days?
So initially, to give you a little bit of context, they'd have obviously tried this thing out. They had gotten after Yunus, Nobel laureate, powerful friends, the Clintons and whatever, and it went without too much trouble. The leader of opposition, you put her in jail over a year, you get away with it. The Chief Justice, you send the Chief Justice in exile. Okay, that goes through. One pesky dissident, you can get on, that can be dealt with. And suddenly all of you here and across the globe, Penn and everyone else, you made hell for them, So that was the first thing. But of course, I was initially, once that happened, they were very, very angry. The next thing I'm not meant to do is speak out in court. I spoke out in court. Because I spoke out in court, the judge was required to investigate. He didn't. He put me in remand, which is in Bangladesh a euphemism for state-sanctioned torture. I'm meant to capitulate in remand. I didn't. I go to jail. When you go to jail, then your family's meant to step into action. They hold a press release. They ask for forgiveness from the Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister in her largesse forgives you. I come out. I thank the Prime Minister. The family thanked the Prime Minister. That script went out of the window. So eventually they had to release me. I'm out on bail. The case still goes. And I've continued to speak. I say here now what I've said before, and I will continue to say what I do. I am the citizen of an independent nation. My constitution gives me rights. I will exercise those rights continuously. And it's their problem. They can't deal with it. And I think that is the space we need to create. But what happened in jail was for me very interesting. Not that I'd recommend going to jail, but I was treated very, very well by my fellow prisoners. They ensured that nothing could happen to me. There is nothing, no transaction that takes place in jail without money. I was never allowed to pay money. One warden made the mistake of asking money for me, and the prisoners got him transferred. You don't mess with this guy. Yeah? And amongst many other things we did, we got musical instruments into the jail. They formed a band. They've written 40 songs. We've got a beautiful library in there. We've got a vegetable patch. We started adult education classes, and classes are overfilling. We've got jail reform programs and things like that. So all sorts of things. But then we also did things, again, we did it collectively. We were able to convince the prison. I mean, I didn't have a camera. And of course, I was itching for this camera. But the thing was, we said, look, let us have brushes and paint. And they let us do that. So they started painting murals. And all along the interior of Kiranigone jail are these giant murals, some of them 32 feet wide. It's like in the interior of a museum. And then they kept one space. And they came up to me and said, we want one of your photographs. And I'm not going to tell you how we got it in, but we managed to get one of my pictures inside. It was a picture you will see of this beautiful red sail. And they painted a 12-foot mural of that painting inside on the wall of the hospital. I was in the hospital at that time, as an homage to me. And it's a picture that's been in National Geographic, in The Guardian. It's been very widely published. For me, to be on there on the Kiranigone jail, that's the ultimate.
I'm aware that we have run out of time, and I think that's a good place to stop the conversation. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. And thank you for all that you did.